For years on this program, we've debated whether the Indian Point nuclear plant ought to be shut down. Now, the plant in Buchanan, New York, it sits just 30 miles from Manhattan, and it was under the flight path of one of those hijacked planes on 9/11. You add to that all the serious safety concerns to the underlying worries that the plant was harming the region's environment, and this has been a debate that's raged for decades. So in January, when Governor Andrew Cuomo announced he had a deal to close Indian Point by the end of 2021, a lot of people assumed the dangers posed by the plant would become a thing of the past. Well, turns out there is another major environmental as well as safety concern that will outlive the plant and perhaps outlive most of the people who live near it. What to do with the radioactive nuclear waste that remains at that plant, the spent fuel rods that once powered the plant but now have nowhere to go. Fios One and Journal News, they took a closer look in a special investigation, the nuclear option. Here's Fios One's Ray Ramundi.
The alarm sounding once again at the Indian Point nuclear plant in Buchanan. This time the noise coming from the battle over what to do with the hundreds of tons of spent fuel or nuclear waste once the controversial plant closes. Now a renewed plan about how to transfer the waste from the site by way of the Hudson River. Tom, when people hear the transportation of fuel waste coming out of that plant you see right behind us, that could get people going, huh?
Certainly does, yeah. It's, when people hear, fuel on barges coming through their communities and those sort of things.
Journal News investigative reporter Tom Zambito talking with more than a dozen environmental and policy specialists after sifting through hundreds of pages of documents to assess the Department of Energy's plan to get rid of the nuclear waste. Right now, a plan to transfer nuclear waste from reactors at Indian Point, as well as other plants around the country, focuses on Yucca Mountain in southwest Nevada, a proposed repository site where the spent fuel will be transported and entombed for hundreds of years. A 2,700-mile journey away from Indian Point, thus raising the ultimate question: how will it get there? The Department of Energy is considering multiple options, including enclosing the waste in these special casks and then loading the cask on a barge and shipping them down the Hudson River. In fact, a 207-page report released by the Department of Energy outlined a detailed plan, stating barges were, quote, a feasible option and would, quote, play a secondary or supplementary role in the transportation of radioactive waste to a repository.
They're going to have to find a way to get it down the river.
The Indian Point plant is in a very unique location, far away from any cross-country mode of transportation, which has both policy and environmental experts asking whether it's safer for the spent fuel to travel by rail or by water. According to the report, once loaded onto barges, the cask will be taken to the Jersey City seaport, where they will then be loaded onto trains and taken across the country.
Transporting is a huge problem, and it's a very difficult problem to solve.
Richard Webster is the legal director of Riverkeeper, an environmental group focused on protecting the Hudson River. Your take is, until we find a permanent place for us to store this fuel, we should worry about fixing what we have right here.
Absolutely. I mean, at the moment, a lot of the fuel is in the spent fuel pool, and the first priority is to take that fuel out of the spent fuel pool. Those spent fuel pools are both dangerous radiologically, and they're leaking radioactive water into the ground, which is then flowing down to the Hudson River.
Meanwhile, the village of Buchanan and neighboring communities are banking on the transfer of the spent fuel to happen soon, because when the 240-acre plant closes in April of 2021, they stand to lose upwards of $30 million in annual property taxes. Mayor Teresa Knickerbocker says there's plenty of space for reuse of the property for revenue.
There are 60 acres to the north. Also to the south, there's approximately 25 acres. So currently we are working very hard looking to see what we can do for the reuse of that.
For now, all eyes are on Washington and whether congressional leaders will find a permanent site in America to store the spent fuel. A vote is supposed to take place by the end of this year, a vote which will have a crucial impact on the areas surrounding Indian Point. In Westchester County, Ray Ramundi, Fios One News.
Ray, thank you. And now for even more insight on the spent fuel rod problem at IP, I sat down earlier this week with the journalist who filed that report for the Journal News, investigative reporter Tom Zambito. It feels like we've been talking about Indian Point forever. And finally now, there seems to be, even if not consensus, at least a decision that this plant will be decommissioned. And it's not the only one that we've seen. Connecticut Yankee, you've seen other plants as well, not just on the East Coast, that are shuttering their doors in time. But the overarching question is what to do with what's left behind, with these spent fuel pools. And I guess that's where the rub is.
Right.
So just clarify, because people have heard of Yucca Mountain for a long time in Nevada. They thought if it ever closed, that would have been the resting place. Right now, that's both a political football and it's still undecided, correct?
It still remains a political football. That's right, Rich. It's, you know, the folks in Nevada still don't want it. Nothing's changed there. But brought into this equation now is this question of, instead of Yucca, maybe you bring in an interim storage facility, something in New Mexico that might assuage people who are politically opposed to Yucca Mountain. New Mexico seems to want it. A lot of folks in Congress seem to be in favor of it, so that could be the option. It could be the compromise that's coming down the pike.
So hypothetically, let's say they find a resting spot for this. Then the question says, how do you get it there?
Right.
So help me out here. The current iteration, as you write about, is the thing would be put on a barge. It would go down the Hudson River. It would go to basically a New Jersey seaport, where then it would be put on rails, and then it would go cross country to whether it be Nevada or to New Mexico, right?
Sounds simple, right? Yeah, right. But yeah, that's essentially, that's the idea. That's how it would go. You know, a lot of opposition to that. There was opposition back 15 years ago when this idea was first broached, and now we're opening up the Yucca conversation again, and so it's been opened up again. You know, the environmentalists say, you know, what happens to a barge if it, you know, for some reason sinks into the river? You know, we'll never get it out of there.
There's also been articulated concerns about, obviously in the day and age of terrorism, how much of a rich target this would be. I want to read a quote. This came from then Mayor of Las Vegas, Mayor Goodman, in fact, whose wife now is the current mayor of that city. He said at the time that all it takes is one terrorist with a TOW, which is an anti-tank missile, obtained on the black market, take out a truck carrying this deadly substance, and we've got Chernobyl in our backyard. This is the stuff of our worst nightmares. And he said that comment, Tom, 15 years ago, but it still bears repeating. This would be, if somebody wanted to, a slow-moving target that would be going, you know, 5-10 miles an hour over a more than 2,000-mile trek. That's got to be of concern to the Department of Homeland Security and all the points in between.
Right. Clearly, it's absolutely is a concern. I mean, those comments were made by Mayor Goodman in the months after 9/11, so we certainly understand the risk. But you know, talking to the folks in the industry, they say that there are hundreds of shipments every day move crisscross the country. You know, U.S. Navy uses nuclear fuel, so it happens every day. So there are operations, there are methods to sort of get it safely to another place. But you're talking about commercial reactors, you're talking about tons and tons of spent nuclear fuel. Still,
I think you said in your piece the equivalent, correct me if I'm wrong, of a football field 8 feet high with these nuclear substances.
That's right. Yeah, it's a considerable amount, and more is coming. And they say another 60,000 metric tons of fuel in the years to come. You know, these nuclear power plants are closing all across the country. So it's basically sitting in communities across the United States. So the question becomes, do you leave it there? Do you leave it in these communities that clearly don't want it? Indian Point doesn't want it, or do you move it?
And with that NIMBY argument that we're talking about, people not necessarily wanting to be the repositories of these entombed spent fuel or nuclear waste, you have the converse argument. And I've had both Clearwater and Riverkeeper here, and for many years they made many compelling arguments about population density of Indian Point to this area, a lack of a viable evacuation plan, safety and security concerns around the plant. But where I had a problem in reading your reporting of it is the same people who wanted the doors to be shut into the plant and said it was dangerous to have it there, and talk about even some of it leaking into the waters of the Hudson River, they're basically now saying, well, just leave it here and just basically entomb it better.
Right.
To me, it strikes of an argument of trying to have it both ways.
Yeah, there is certainly an element to that, Rich, and what they're trying to say, I guess, is that now it's in these steel and cement casks, so that changes the equation a little bit. It's not in a cooling pool. It's not as volatile as it could be because it's stored away. But again, you know, doing that, you know, one of the suggestions is to sort of move these gigantic steel casks around the facility. Now that's hazardous as well. You know, I don't know that anybody is going to go for that idea. Certainly Entergy would likely not think it's a good idea.
And we should mention a lot of these nuclear power plants that I learned from your reporting, they're on the water for practical reasons. But when you're on the water right along the Hudson or in the Connecticut seashore with the other plant that closed there, or even on the Pacific where there was a similar plant in California, those are prime real estate. And with the communities that have lost or will lose the tax base that was associated with having a major tenant like these nuclear operators there, they'd like to do something other than just leave hundreds of acres basically as untouched soil.
Right. Yeah, that's when the debate really becomes real, because it impacts a lot of people. You know, people will lose jobs in those communities. The Hendrick Hudson School District losing $20 million. The superintendent is at every Indian Point meeting that I've been at and really trying to come up with a solution. They've all become experts in nuclear fuel and what goes on at Indian Point. So those decisions, they're real for these people, and you're talking about, again, tens of millions of dollars, and they have to replace that somehow. Otherwise, these communities will be in distress. Now, replacing that means either putting that property, that Indian Point property, back to work somehow, maybe a gas plant, maybe some other alternative that folks would come up with. But with the spent fuel there, it makes that very difficult.
And people should know that this is not a debate without a cost right now, in that, first of all, there was more than $1 billion I learned from your reporting that was spent putting together this report that never found a final resting spot for what to do, but how to do it, where to do it, et cetera, was part of that. And every year we're subsidizing these plants because there was a compact made that if we ever shutter the doors here, we're not gonna have to leave it at this resting spot. We'll find another alternative location for it. And every year politics grinds this to a halt. Government's writing a check with our tax dollars basically to keep it in place.
Right. The deal was that it was supposed to be removed by 1998, that the federal government would find a place for these commercial reactors to put their spent fuel. That never happened. I mean, the debate goes back to the Carter administration. So that never happened. So as a result, there's, you know, these companies have sued the federal government for being forced to remain as sort of de facto storage sites for nuclear fuel. That's the total right now is $6 billion in you know, settlements and litigation, and they expect that to grow to almost $25 billion in the years to come.
What does your gut tell you here? Is there a solution, whether it's now maybe New Mexico instead of Nevada? At the end of the day, do they move this stuff out or not?
Well, on the political side, I think yes. You know, from everything I hear, the New Mexico option is real. You know, people like that. They won't face as much opposition as they would because it's consent-based. It's New Mexico wants it. They won't face the opposition that they did in Nevada. But there's still a lot of hurdles. That's sort of why we pursued this story, because now this story takes the debate out of Nevada, right? It takes it into the heartland where every community is sort of going to have to be dealing with spent nuclear fuel coming through their communities. And they're going to have to answer the same questions or have the same debate that Nevada had years ago.
As they say, to be continued. Tom Zambito, as always, great job. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich.
And this reminder, to learn more about the investigation, the nuclear option, please be sure to check out the Journal News digital report at lohud.com and their full report. It'll be in the paper, Journal News, this Sunday, October 15th. All right, coming up next, unless you've lived with it, opioid abuse, it can seem like an abstract issue, something that happens to them, not you, which is why personal stories of addiction and recovery are so important in combating opioid abuse. And that's exactly what the Nassau County DA's office is doing now. We're going to meet the real-life recovery story behind their latest outreach campaign. That coming up next.